The last thing we're going to do before we start looking at other routers is we're going to add a 404 page. So a 404 page is basically the page that represents when something can't be found. It's the, hey, you tried to visit a path or a page or something that wasn't valid. So it's nice to have this where it's like a catch-all that tells people like the page you're trying to get to isn't something that we know of, or we don't know where it exists, or anything like that, and just let them know that they're hitting a bad page. So to do this, we're going to go to our code, and the simplest way is just to put an else statement after all of our current if and else ifs, and then to just write whatever we want this page to be. So in this case, we can put an h1. We could not find the page you were looking for. So we can do a frowny face, put the h1 there, and then we could add, another line here that says. Actually, I'm just gonna do this all in one string. Please email us if you keep being sent to an invalid page. So it's nice just to tell people, usually you might put an email address here or something that they know how to get in touch. I'm gonna close that paragraph tag. So we've got this whole string that we can print out, and I'm gonna go ahead and show you what it looks like. We'll start our server up since it wasn't running. And we'll refresh. And you can see that if you go to /dog or something like that, it says we cannot find the page you're looking for. Please email us if you keep being sent to an invalid page. So now we've got a nice catch-all, and this will work for anything. We can do gibberish here, do /John, any of that'll work. So we have a catch-all page. The one thing that we're missing here that we talked about a little bit earlier is the HTTP status code. And to set that, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the net HTTP docs. And we're going to look at the response writer object. So we're going to go to the index, and then we'll go to the response writer. Once we get to the response writer, we're looking for a way to set HTTP status codes. So we've already looked at the header, and we know that this is a map of keys to values. So that's probably not what we're looking for. We're looking for some way to set an integer status code. So we can look a little bit farther down here, and the write method takes in a byte slice and it returns an int and an error. This is what's being called when we call the format.print or any of those methods that, format.fprint, where we pass in the response writer. It's using this write method to write the response body. So we know that this write is used to write the response body, and it's not what we're going to use to set status codes. But if you look at into the comments here, you might notice that it talks about status codes a little bit. So this happens when anytime we call the write method before setting a status code, this right here object will go ahead and handle setting the status code for us. So it'll set it to the 200 status code, which means that everything was okay. The http.status okay is what it's referring to. So that kind of alludes to the fact that this write header seems to be the way to set status codes. So as we scroll down here, we'll see that it says in the comments, write header sends an HTTP response header with status code. So that's what we want. We want a way to write the status code and tell it that the page wasn't found, that they went to an invalid page. So if we go back to our code, you can see that inside of here, and this is the important detail that came from these comments, was we need to do this before we call format.fprint, because if we don't, it will go ahead and set the 200 OK status code. So we want to do w.write header, and in here we want to write 404. But realistically, we don't really want to write 404. And you can even see this in the HTTP package. It calls write header http.status OK. So instead of putting an actual 200 there, they use this, this constant or variable, I'm not sure which it is, to set the status code. So we'd like to do something similar in our code so that when people are reading it, they don't need to look at integer codes and figure out what they mean. They can actually just read the text and get an idea of what it's supposed to mean. So from here, we're actually going to we're going to search for status OK. So in searching for that, you can see that here they're actually constants, and you can see that status OK is the 200 status code. We're looking for the 404 status code. So you can see here, if you go down to 404, we've got status not found. So that's what we actually want to set here, is we want to use http.status not found. So we write that header, we say that it's a 404, and then we go ahead and render the HTML. The header up here is completely fine. We can let the content type still be HTML. But once we have all of that, we can stop our server, restart it, and we can go back and reload the page. So nothing's going to look visually different. That's an important thing to note with status codes, is usually they don't really change how things look. But if I go into the console, or the developer tools, refresh the page, I can go to the network, and you can see here that we now have a status code of 404. So this is nice for whenever tools or other things visit our web page, especially an API or something like that. You want to make sure you're returning nice status codes, and it gives our browser and like the other developer tools an idea of what's going wrong. But for the end user, you need to count on the text to sort of tell them what happened and why the page isn't showing. The last thing we need to do is commit our changes. I haven't been very diligent about creating new branches for every single video, but I'm still going to go ahead and show you that you can stop the server. We can git checkout-b, and we're going to make this branch 3.3, adding a 404 page. So we've got this new branch. So now none of our changes are going to be pushed into master until we actually merge them in. So that's nice to keep master clean. And we're going to get status. We want to see which files are changed, and it looks like the only changed file was main.go, which is what we're expecting. If other files are changed, that might mean that we accidentally changed something. So now we're going to get diff, and we'll see that the only code that was even changed was this else block, and that's what we wanted to add. So everything looks good there. I can hit Q to exit that. I'll get add-a to add the files. We can see here that once I get status, now they're staged and ready to be committed. And now we can get commit. Added a 404 page. So we've got our 404 page. We can now get checkout master, and we can get merge 3.3, and we are good. Now we can get pushed origin master, and we have our web application ready to go. We're now ready to move on to looking at other routers. In these routers, we're going to first just explore how they work, but then finally we're going to take all these pages that we have, and we're going to translate them from what we have into using that router to make the same effect. So we won't be adding new pages throughout the rest of this chapter, but it's important to see how we translate this basic router that we created into using another router.